Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the podcast. I am joined with an amazing guest, Mr. Viran. Viran first started out as a history teacher in London, then moved to Japan and spent years advising some of the world's top PR firms, eventually working his way up to vice president. 3 years ago, Viran decided to take a year of paternity leave. That time with his son changed everything. He trained as a coach and walked away from corporate life, not because he had to, but because he wanted more. More purpose, more balance, more time for what truly matters. Now he helps others do the same. Viran created the Gaijin Smash and developed a no-fluff, action-driven coaching model to help bilingual high achievers in Japan find meaningful, purpose-driven work, balance career, family, and personal interests, and prioritize time for what actually matters to you. I am pleased to be joined with him on today's episode of the podcast. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hi, Viran. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for your time and coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, would you mind sharing a bit about yourself to the audience?
Yeah, I guess I'll begin from the beginning, which is like I'm born in London, and my mum's Chinese Malaysian, my dad's Indian. He grew up in Kenya, and they both met in London, and that's where I was born, and that's where I grew up. Grew up in East London, near the old West Ham football stadium, and in a fairly rough neighborhood. And luckily, I did well at school. And I got scholarships to go to university. So I got to go to York in the north of England. I went to California, went to Oxford. And after Oxford, I started a program in the UK called Teach First, which puts teachers in straight out of uni into schools in challenging environments. And for me, I was basically teaching in my own neighborhood. So it was fairly easy for me. And then from after doing that for a few years, I applied for a competition, a scholarship program in Japan, where you come to Japan for 2 years, you learn Japanese for the first year, you work for the second year, and yeah, I won that competition in 2014, and then I never went home. I stayed in Japan. It's been 10 years already. After the first year of Japanese study, I joined the Olympic Committee in 2015, and then I was in their communications department. And then from there, I went into a PR firm, first working with like governments, and then I joined a few different agencies, going more into corporate communications and reputation management, dealing with crises and message development. And then, yeah, back in 2022, when my wife got pregnant, I decided that I would take a full year of paternity leave because in Japan, the government provides fathers with 1 year and mothers with 2 years of parental leave. Hardly anyone takes it because there's a lot of cultural pressure to do so, but companies can't stop you. They can't legally stop you from taking it. So I thought I'll max out my time. I did a year. Within that year, I trained to be a coach. I went back to work after the year had finished. I went back for 6 months and quickly realized that I wanted to do something different. If I was going to be taken away from my family, I wanted to be doing something that I really loved. And that particular role wasn't that. So I decided to quit. I then started my coaching business um, a year ago, last March. And then in November, my wife's 2 years of maternity leave finished, and I decided that I would look after my son as a full-time stay-at-home dad and then coach in the evenings. And that's what I'm currently doing now.
That was a very detailed introduction and
Sorry
very,
about that. That's a whole life
no,
story in like one.
no, that was perfect. I'm sure my audience got a detailed and better idea on who you are more than my introduction. So thank you for that. You mentioned, firstly, you mentioned that you are originally from the UK, East London, born and brought up, and you have been based in Japan since 2014. So what initially inspired this move, and what do you love the most about where you are right now?
So when I was in California, I had a roommate who was Japanese and he's from Tokyo. So back in 2008, I think, when I graduated, I came here to visit for a few weeks and I was like, look, I'm definitely going to move to Japan one day. I just loved it. I just loved how like safe it was compared to East London. I loved how cheap it was and how good the food was. And so it was always on my mind to come here and live here one day. And yeah, I was aware of this scholarship. It's called a Daiwa Scholarship. It's only available to British citizens, but I was aware of it back in 2008, and then it was only after I'd been teaching for a few years I thought now is a good time to apply, and that's why I did it, and that's why I stayed. Yeah, just coming here and just I think the safety and the convenience of everything is just a very convenient city to live. Like Tokyo and London are quite similar in terms of like the vibe, I guess. It's it's very they're both very busy cities, but Tokyo is just so much safer. I can't like emphasize that more. It's just a really safe city to be in.
You are the founder, captain, manager, and player for the BEFC Lions Tokyo, and you're someone who loves football. What did this experience bring to your life, and how has this experience shaped you as a person?
So the BEFC is a club. It's British Embassy Football Club, and that's been a club for in Japan for maybe 2 or 3 decades already. Um, and they were based out of the British Embassy in Japan, obviously. And my first, the scholarship that I came out on, we had like a welcome reception party at the embassy. And as part of my self-introduction on the stage there, I said, look, I've just arrived. I played a lot of football at home, but I'm really looking for people to play with here. So if anyone plays, let me know. Let's kick a ball together. And one of the guys that was there was running BEFC at the time. And he said, look, come and join our team. And I played with them for a few years. And about 3 years later, the club had just got so big. And we're in the league. And obviously, you can only take 15 people to a game normally. And there were maybe like 60 people signed up. And so we decided to make another team. And so that was a team that I founded, BFC Lions. Um, we had the two teams. So we're one team that's way more competitive, and then my team, which was much more social. And yeah, for basically my whole time in Japan, I actually retired from playing from the club last year. I'm still, these are still my friends, so I still see them, but I haven't actually played this year with them at all. Um, but for the last 8 or 9 years in Tokyo, that was a big part of my social life. And we were saying earlier that Japan is quite a hard city because no one speaks English. If you don't speak the language, it can be quite hard to have social relationships with. Football just really gave me that in and a kind of like a community that was set up for me from the beginning. So yeah, I'm very appreciative of that whole experience.
Do you have any key memories that you would like to share, maybe from a football match or a special like experience that you had, in this sort of period in the team?
I mean, there's lots of memories. There's loads of memories. I mean, as I said, they were like the core of my social life. So there's a lot of off the pitch events. We were really good. Um, Most of us were snowboarders. So in the Christmas and the winter in Japan, we've got obviously there's mountains here. So we would go on snowboard trips together. Those were like the best winters because we would go up to Hokkaido. Um, the trip that I'm thinking about right now, it was we were supposed to fly there because there was so much snow, the flight got cancelled. And some of the people were like, "Oh, we'll just go tomorrow when the flights are back." But a few of us were like, "No, we should go today." So that if the snow is like heavy, it's going to be amazing if we can actually get there and go on it first thing tomorrow morning. So if we took the train, we basically got the refund on the plane tickets and took the train from Tokyo all the way to Hokkaido. It took a day, but it was great. If you flew, it would have taken a few hours. Taking a train basically took like 10, I think if I can remember correctly, it was like 10 hours. But yeah, we just had fun like the whole trip. There was about eight of us on that train. And that's probably like the highlight. And just having like the whole mountain to ourselves was amazing. Um, in terms of the games, because it was a league, it was nice that there was a league, there's three divisions, and there's a cup. And in the cup you can play teams in other divisions. And we got to the semi-final. No, we got to the final one year of the cup. And in the semis, we played a team that was in a higher division than us. And I think it was a 0-0 draw. It went to PKs, to penalty kicks. And our two best players took the first two kicks and both missed. And the other team, they scored theirs. And then I took the third PK, hit a really weak shot, but it went in. Our goalkeeper took the second shot, and then the goalkeeper saved the other team's shot. So we eventually actually won that PK, and we got to the final of that cup. And that was probably like my favorite memory of a game.
So I mentioned, firstly, we talked about like your growing up and, being in the UK and all that experience. We mentioned your passion, which was like football, something you really enjoy. But 10 years ago, you kind of mentioned that you were a history teacher in London and how that first started after graduation. It was something that empowering people to learn for themselves is far more effective than simply telling them what to think. That was what you said about that experience. So how do you continue to empower people with Gaijin Smash, and who empowers you?
Okay. So with teaching, especially in terms of like the children I was teaching, the community I was teaching in, there's not many people that really valued education or understood the value of education and where it could take them. So for me, part of my job was, look, I can either teach you and just talk to you about everything you need to know on test, or I can make this relevant for you and teach you the skills behind it and explain how you can use it in lots of different, it's transferable skills basically, and how you can use it in different situations. And that was kind of my teaching style. It was always rather than just standing at the front of the classroom and like dictating, here are the answers you need for your exam. To the kids, it was more like, look, we're going to do group work, we're going to do a project, and here are the things that you're going to be, here's the end product. So, for example, you're going to tell me about um, British medicine in the 1800s. And so there'll be like the knowledge requirements. But then there was also like school requirements. So it would be teamwork, it would be research, it would be summarization, it would be presentation skills. And so I try to make a good balance of like skills versus knowledge. Because I think the way that the education system is tested in the UK, it's very much about how much you remember from the course. But I think especially if you're not academically minded, which if you're not in that kind of community, then you're probably not going to be. It's much more about how is this going to help me in my life later down the line. That's kind of how I taught. I was more focused on those skills. In terms of coaching, it's the same. I think if you're a pure coach, you're not giving advice. You're not telling someone, here's what you should do with your life. You're basically asking questions and, provoking thoughts to sort of say, look, I hear what you're saying. Now let me ask you this question. And what ideas does that open up for you? And let's, troubleshoot and imagine and strategize what you could do now. And so the onus or the responsibility of the decision is always on the client in a coaching relationship, especially the way that I do it. And so when there's a success that's been made, it's always, it's the same with students, right? If a student gets an A, that's a student's A. If a client hits their goal, that's a client's goal. I'm just the facilitator in that process. And I think coaching is, you can be a bad, no, I mean, you can be a good coach and just basically talk a lot and tell people what to do. But it's more often that you're going to be a bad coach if you do that, especially if you don't understand completely that person's situation. So for me, I take the same mentality in that I'm going in there trying to empower and encourage someone to fulfill their goals for themselves because ultimately it's their responsibility and it's their achievements. And so they should be able to sort of have complete ownership over whatever they achieve. Oh, and then the question was who inspires me, right? I guess, I mean, it's going to be a boring answer, but I mean, the person that inspires me the most is my mom. Um, she raised me by herself, and she loves her job. She's been a nurse for 50 years. So she's always worked in service of other people, and she teaches yoga for free in community centers. She's been doing that for about 20 years. And so I always look at her and I'm always inspired by her sense of service to other people. And she's very stubborn and she knows what she wants to do and that's what she's going to do. Um, and so, yeah, she's probably the person that kind of inspires me the most um, in that sense.
That, that's great. And also, I think that you doing Gaijin Smash is also a service to your clients and then people that you help out. And you mentioned that you're the facilitator in the process. And even though maybe a client or a student gets their goal, but in reality, if you're not the facilitator, they probably wouldn't reach that goal. So that's another way to look at it. And we mentioned a lot about Gaijin Smash, but we didn't really go into the detail of it. So I mentioned in the introduction about the coaching model, but to my audience who wants a more detailed idea on your coaching model, how did you develop it and what effect do you hope to create with the meaning?
So I did a coaching course, and that basically dealt with how to be a coach and how to coach people. But there was a few weeks basically based on the marketing side. And it's about kind of defining who your niche is, who's your ideal client, and what problem are you helping them to solve. And so for me, this was like very early on. This is maybe like 2 months into a 6 month course. I was like, it makes sense for me to sort of like talk about being a successful foreigner in Japan because that's kind of you wanted something where people can look at you and be like, okay, I can see that this guy kind of knows what he's talking about. He's been through something similar, or he's got some insights and some understanding in this situation. So, the idea that I played with was to use a phrase that people in Japan might know. It's called Gaijin Smash. And the phrase is used to describe a situation where a foreigner comes to Japan and doesn't understand the social rule. So, for example, there's a lot of rules in Japan. One of them might be on trains, you don't speak on the phone, you don't eat or drink. So, whenever there's like a tourist, for example, and they're talking loudly on their phones or they're having a hamburger on the train, like no one's really going to say anything, but everyone is like judging that person. And a Gaijin Smash is basically when you knew the rule, but you did it anyway. And the way that I wanted to play with that term was in a corporate setting. Um, it's very the Japanese corporate culture is very much like you sit down and we have a phrase like don't be the nail that sticks out because if you're the nail that sticks out you'll get hammered down. And so my idea was well actually there's a lot of foreigners that come here and like I don't want to like cause any trouble so I'm just gonna like keep my head down and be quiet and just sort of let someone else take control of my career. I didn't want to do that and I think the other strategy some foreigners have here is let me be Japanese. I'm going to be like, I'm going to speak Japanese all the time and be really polite and, overly polite in some ways. Um, and I was like, well, I've always kind of been like myself and been direct and been focused on the actual outcome and not just like the means behind it. If we can get a successful outcome quickly, and this is the most direct way to do it, then let's just do it. And obviously there's a lot of communication that has to go with that process and making sure that everyone's on board with that. Because if you're zooming ahead to from A to B, but everyone else doesn't know what's happening, then that's going to fracture relationships in your organization. So that was kind of the idea that I had behind using the term Gaijin Smash. It was to coach high achievers that come to Japan and finally they've been used to being in the spotlight and being like really good at the jobs and being told, calm down, like there's no need to stand out, just just go with the flow, and you'll get promoted in 5 or 6 years. And for me personally, I was always really impatient to get promoted. And I got promoted like 5 times in 6 years in my PR career. And so I was like, that will be the focus of the Gaijin Smash, right? So you don't have to be someone else. You can be yourself and still succeed in Japan as a foreigner. But I wanted to focus on bilingual, high achieving internationals as my ideal client. Normally in their 30s, um, around their 30s, at least 30s or 40s, are kind of like my sweet spot because I feel like I'm nearly 40, so that's kind of it makes sense for me to sort of know what people are going through, and especially their parents, because I just feel like you understand more about time management, about leadership when you're a parent than when you're not. And so those analogies are much easier to create when you're talking with a client that also has kids. And the model of coaching that I practice, it's based on solutions focused therapy. So therapy basically looks at the past and it helps people unpack traumas or big events in their lives. And you basically stay there. You stay in the past. And in coaching, the focus is always on the future. So you can reference the past, but actually you're really more focused on what's going to happen next. And so solutions focused coaching um, takes the same strategy. It's basically very um, short, defined scope of coaching. So we're not talking about your whole life. It's saying, look, you're coming to me and you have a goal, or there's a challenge that you're dealing with, and we're going to talk through it and work out your best strategy that you can take right now, that will help you to the next step. So we talk for maybe an hour, for example, in one session. We look at the challenge or the goal you're facing from different angles, and at the end of the call, we'll have a commitment to do one thing, and then we'll evaluate that how that went in the next call. And normally within 6 sessions, so 6 months, I have one session a month, so it gives you enough time to do what you said you were going to do and to evaluate its impact. Within 6 months, I think all of my clients so far have achieved what they wanted to achieve.
Wow, that sounds really great, and I'm glad to hear that, your clients were able to achieve what you wanted to achieve on the last point. But going back to a little bit of what you said that you're a bit impatient, when it comes to promotion, and you had a lot of promotion over your PR work, and that kind of leads me to what I kind of said at the start, where you walked away from something because you wanted more. And it's kind of like the same idea, but in this sense, at that time when you walked away from, the corporate life and everything, you wanted more purpose, more balance. At the time when you were walking away from something like that, why did you feel it was important to want more purpose and more balance and more time for what truly is important to you? And were you aware at the time of what you were getting into, or did like the experience that you had or are having right now is taking you by surprise?
So I think obviously I mentioned my mum earlier, and her focus has always been to other people, service for others. And I think that had rubbed off on me, but I wasn't completely aware of it. When I left Oxford University, I could have gone into at the beginning of the career, I really could have done anything. And I chose to go into teaching because that's what I thought was my calling. Um, and I loved it. I really loved that job. Um, and I had impact on people's lives, and I loved that side of it. When I left that to come to Japan and I started going to PR, it was much less about impact on people's lives. And instead, I was playing a different game. And I was like, okay, as a teacher, I was making loads of impact on people's lives, but not making that much money. Now it's the opposite. I'm getting paid pretty well, but I'm actually, am I having any real positive impact on people's lives? And there were different ways that I tried to kind of like go around this. So I was subtly aware of it. So for example, I trained to be a phone counselor on a suicide lifeline, and I was doing that on weekends. I took a course in ESG investing so that I could focus on like ESG communications around like environment, social, and governance, topics because I thought that would have more of a positive benefit to society. Then, I was doing a lot of reputation management, so protecting the reputations of companies which had been going through like a negative thing, whether it was their fault or not, right? So I think once I became a dad, it was like, as I said earlier, if I'm going to be taken away from my family now, is the alternative is being at work more important to the world than being a dad at home? And I couldn't square that circle. I couldn't make that make sense. So that's kind of one of the main reasons why I walked away from that job.
When it comes to um that year when you mentioned that you took paternity leave, and I mentioned to you that this might have been like a transformational experience to you off camera before we had this interview. How did this period transform everything in your life, and how did this period give you that sense that you want more in terms of like not only providing more for your coaching and for your clients, but also to what is needed at the time?
So in the paternity year, I wasn't actually coaching that year. I was training to be a coach, but I wasn't coaching anyone. But what was different about that was I think there were a lot of days, particularly on weekends when you don't have work, where you might have been drinking on Friday and waking up on a Saturday morning and just being like feeling a bit hungover and just thinking like, what am I doing with my day? Or like even if you've been drinking a lot and you get a bit depressed, so what am I doing with my life? And I think that first year of being a dad and just always having a reason to get up in the morning was transformational for me. It was like I think a lot of people talk about finding purpose, and I think if you wanted me to define what purpose is, it's kind of like the reason to get up in the morning. And when I became a dad, I had that reason like right in front of me, screaming, And so I was just very fulfilled, and to be able to spend that year with my wife and the kid, it was just the best. Every day was like I mean, it was hard at times, being a dad for the first time, being parents for the first time, and whenever our kid was sick, it was scary, but it was a journey we were all on together, and every single decision felt important. Whether it was like how much to feed him, or when to start feeding him, or when to start introducing foods, and how much to let him sleep, and how much do you travel. Every decision was going through this filter of, is this decision going to benefit our family or not? And so becoming a dad kind of gave me this lens to see the world in, which gave me direction. And I don't think I had that since I left teaching. Um, and so after that, that's kind of probably one of the reasons why it was so hard going back to work. Um, because it was then I was, back in the office and it was like, what am I doing here, really? If I wasn't here, I've not been here for a year and nothing's really changed. And if I wasn't here, would it really affect anyone's lives? Whereas if I'm not at home with my kid, I that question wouldn't even need to be asked really. And personally for me, I didn't grow up with a father. My father died when I was young, and so it was really important for me to kind of reclaim that side of my childhood as well. And so that's why I wanted to spend time with my son. And even in November, when my wife went back to work, that was a big reason why I was like, you know what, the coaching can also be sidelined because when am I going to get this time again? Let me just focus on the here and now. So, as I said, becoming a dad completely changed my life in terms of how I evaluate everything, every decision that I make.
And we mentioned you write a lot about balance. So in your daily life, what do you do to achieve a work-life balance between coaching, which is something that you actively do, and spending time with your family and your son, which is something that you do as well and you pay a lot of attention to, and you mentioned that that's an active part of your life. Do you have any tips also that you can give to the audience?
Yeah, so I mean, I think work-life balance for me, it was developed when I was a teacher because I didn't have any, and you wake up in the morning, you're planning lessons, you're going to school, you're teaching, you're doing after school activities, then you're marking books, you sleep, you get up, you do it again. And you have those long holidays, but at least half those holidays are still just, you kind of catching up with work that you didn't get around to doing before and preparing for the next year or the next term. And so when I left teaching, and teaching is an interesting job because it's one of those jobs where I would say that most of the things that you do are crucial. Like you can not plan a lesson and you can not mark a book and you can still do the job, but it's just not going to be as good. And I didn't want to be at this, doing my students a disservice. If I if I can do it, then I will do it. And so, I was in my 20s when I was doing that, and that's one of the reasons why I don't think I could go back to teaching now, just because once I became a PR consultant, I realized, look, work is work and life is life. And I don't really want them to mix that well. So one thing that you'll hear from other people that talk about work-life balance is about work-life integration and how, work and life, they can be together. I think, no, keep it separate. And so even with coaching, it's a job that I really enjoy. If I'm spending time with my son from like 7 a.m. until 4:30 p.m., there is no work being done. At most, I might like when I get a few minutes, I might respond to a few like messages on LinkedIn, especially if he's sleeping. But if he's awake and he needs my attention, that's where my attention is going. And in the same way, when I'm doing this or when I'm doing a coaching session, my all of my attention is with the person here on this call. Or if I'm going to a networking event or any other kind of event, I'm very like present. I'm not really trying to juggle too many things. So in terms of the tip, I think it's being very like intentional about where you are and what you're doing. So if you know that you're going to be going to an event, but you're going to be thinking about work, then I might just work then maybe, because if you can't really be at that place fully, then why bother? Why go? Um, and I think the main thing is also like being courageous enough to say no. And you can take that in whichever way you want, whether to say no to the person that's asking you to do something, or to say no to yourself in terms of like, maybe I shouldn't do this, or maybe I shouldn't go to this place. Um, but yeah, it all comes down to clarity about what really what do you want, what's important to you and how you're going to protect that.
I absolutely agree. I think the big point is being present, I would say, whether it's with coaching or like you mentioned the scenario, whether you're at an event, like being present to where you are and the surroundings is really important, especially in coaching when you're coaching someone, you want to actively be present in hearing what they have to say and giving them guidance. So the next point is a lot about the coaching model. And the coaching model, like we mentioned, is framed to help achievers in Japan help reach their best potential. But how can we measure the potential of people and how important is it that people achieve what is best for them and what they can achieve that is best for them?
So, I mean, achieving your potential is basically it's one of those terms that when you break it down, what does it really mean? And I think the way that I understand it is reaching your potential means that you have a goal and how close can you get before you reach it or before you give up. And the way that I want to structure my coaching sessions is, look, what's your goal? And that's what it is. Let's get there as quickly as possible. Let me help you get there as quickly as possible. And so it's I guess coaching. I mean, we mentioned this before the call. Before the call, I think coaching is a luxury rather than a need, and it's a good step to be like, look, I've tried a lot of other things, and I've not been able to achieve this yet. I need some extra help. Let me try a coaching session. And most coaches offer the first session for free anyway, so you always know like if it's going to work for you or not, without investing anything. And so if you can actually achieve your goal, then if that goal was the right one, who's you have to decide if it's the right one for you, right? Like sometimes a question that I ask, how do you know why is this goal important to you, and how will it change your life if you achieve it, and how you feel when you've achieved it? How would you feel if you're not able to achieve it? Those kind of questions kind of highlight whether it's actually worth fighting for. Um, and yeah, I think that's what potential is, right? It's the gap between your current situation and where you actually want it to be.
We mentioned like about balance, we mentioned potential, we mentioned purpose, but one thing that we haven't touched upon is prioritization and self-discipline. And I know that in your life in particular, those are things that are really important because you have a lot going on, looking after family, you have coaching. Can you give an example of how the prioritization of self-discipline and time management contributed to wellness in your life?
I mean, I would say that right now I'm probably the healthiest I've ever been, like mentally, physically, like pretty much in every way, right? And that's all come from, when we talk about prioritization, I always say it's about being clear about what's important to you and having the courage to say no to something. And so for me right now, I don't coach between 7 and 5 p.m. That's when a lot of people are working. And so I have very limited hours in which I can coach. I only really have a 2 hour window per day between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. So if a client can't meet that that schedule, then I can't coach them. Um, and I could be like, oh, I need the cash or I need to like bend over backwards for this person. I mean, obviously there are times where I can be a bit more flexible for on weekends, for example, but generally I'm pretty strict with like this is the time that's been allotted, and if you can make it, great. If you can't make it, right now spending time with my son is the most important thing to me. And it's having that self-discipline to be like, look, I'm very clear. This is the objective right now. This is the mission right now. Making money or, building the business, that can come later. You know, this is the one chance in our lives that we're going to be this age and have this time together. So I really just want to make the most of it. And so that's probably like the easiest way, right? So I think if it can be accessible to anyone, the point is being very clear on what's important to you and just protecting it with the discipline to say no to other things. Because I mean, I can give you another example. I've been offered jobs in the last year, and some of them were like really like lovely people. I think I'd love to work with those people maybe in the future. And the salaries were good, but for me, it just felt like I wanted to spend time with my son right now. So let me just shelve those for now. And if there's still viable options next year or the year after, then great. And if they're not, then they're not. I'm okay with that. I'm at ease with that decision. So yeah, I don't know if it's about the self-discipline. It's just more about like clarity in what's important to me.
So throughout this interview, we mentioned a lot about different key concepts like balance, self-discipline, prioritization, purpose, and many different things, which I hope that you are you as the audience who are watching this are gaining a lot on the type of stuff that Viran does and his experience, his life story, because I think it's very transformational. And as for the coaching, I know that a lot of people who you coach obviously will say that they rely on you in terms of giving them the right guidance. And you mentioned that you focus all on individual coaching. So my question to you is, if they rely on you to coach them, who do you rely on?
Yeah, I think, happiness is all about the quality of your relationships. And so for me, I've been blessed to like grow up with two guys my whole life. So they like I call them my brothers because that's what they feel like. We're not blood related, but we've known each other our whole lives. And then there's obviously my mom and my wife and a few other close friends I can always go to for advice. And you go to a coach and you kind of need someone to listen to you objectively. Um, and you need that kind of like just that very clear focus and strategy without judgment, without bias. Um, and I think that's really where the in a perfect world you have both, right? You have the really close support network of people that love you. They know you really well, and they've got, I wouldn't say that they're like completely objective because they're always going to have an idea of what they think you should be doing, what's best for you. And it's coming from a good place, it's coming from love, but there's always going to be that kind of like filter in what they tell you or what they think about you. Whereas with a coach, you need someone that's objective and unbiased, and that's really there just as your sounding board completely. Um, just to sort of bounce ideas off them and figure out what your next step is. So yeah, I think ultimately you need to be able to rely on both in a perfect world. Um, but yeah, if you don't have either of them, you kind of need the other. I think you need one, if not both.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think that the support network is extremely important. And like you mentioned when you gave your introduction at the start, how you were trying to find like people that share the same interests, and it was great that you found people who like football. You like football, and definitely a good support network is absolutely important. And as we are approaching the end of this interview section of the podcast, I would like to ask you one question that I ask all my guests, which is if you could voice one unique message to the world, what would it be?
I mean, I feel like it's not going to be unique because 100 people you have millions of people would have thought this already, but just like, are you making the most out of your time? Like, when a day ends, was it a good day? Like, did you do everything in your power to make it a good day, to be, to do something that made you happy, made you smile, made you laugh, or did something that progress your life or to get you closer to whatever you want to achieve in your life? Um, yeah, I think that would be it, spend your time wisely. It's not a very unique message, but I think that's the message that I'm trying to live by myself.
Thank you so much for sharing your unique message. That was a great message. Every message is unique and great on its own. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for your time, Viran. It was a pleasure
Yeah.
having you on.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great. Thank you so much.
No worries. I hope you enjoyed. And to my audience who's new to the channel, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video if you did find it interesting and fun. And I hope you gained a lot from this video. And I'll see you all for the next episode. Goodbye.